In the name of Allah, the most gracious and the most merciful, and salutations be upon Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Yes, viewers, as you have been seeing the ad for Gaza-Palestine, Gaza-Israel conflict, there are certain questions. Gaza, the enclave strip of Palestine, which has been destroyed. According to a report, 44% of that area is not worthy to be lived. There's a bombing there. If anybody would like to go and live there, they're going to have paralyzed children born there. By the way, one of the MPs in Israel stated, all of the mothers of Palestine should be killed so that there is no more birth of children. There are loads of questions which have arisen. Today we have managed this program to raise the voice of public. We have got our legal panel today. I would like to start off by introducing with Ramby Mello from number 5 Chambers, who is the author of several books of international human rights. He has represented clients before European Courts of Human Rights Grand Chambers, European Courts of Justice, and Supreme Courts of England and Wales. Welcome you in our program, Ramby.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Next to him is Ashraf Ali, who is an immigration specialist from Ash Immigration. He was also the advisor in SAS against France case, which was challenged by Ramby before Grand Chambers in European Courts of Human Rights to protect the rights of one to manifest one's religious beliefs and cultural practices in public. However, as you are well aware of the current situation in Palestine, I would not like to get in detail. I would like to start off with Ramby by getting his views on the current situation in Gaza and Israel conflict. Yes, Ramby, how would you see this current situation or current conflict in Israel and Gaza?
At the present moment, what I understand from the newspapers, watching television and listening to the radio, is that there have been launches of missiles from Hamas into Israel. Secondly, there has been airstrikes by Israel on civilian targets. And thirdly, the killing of children in Palestine. There is also discussion of the use of ground troops in Palestine, and the situation is very tempestuous.
Yes. Thank you, Ramby. As you have mentioned, there have been a big clash there. Invasions of, I must say, hospitals, because hospitals are being bombed. Children who are being treated upon into the hospital. Electricity is being cut down. Ambulances are not being provided with the fuels. People are dying onto the streets. Children are being kidnapped. Taking this into account, I would like to say, Israel says they're launching airstrikes in their self-defense. Sometimes they say God promised them this land. Keeping this in mind, I would like to ask as to what is self-defense and what Israel has, or when Israel has no threat from the innocent Palestinians.
Every country is entitled to defend its airspace, its territory, its civilians, and the property of its civilians against any form of aggression from outside its territory. It is entitled to use proportionate force to deflect such attacks. The second part of your question, as I understand it, is whether the use of that force by Israel on the civilians in Palestine or against hostile aggressors in Palestine is lawful. And that would depend very much upon the nature of the assaults, the victims in question, and whether civilians are attacked proximately close to the intended targets. if Israel were to recklessly or deliberately attack hospitals, homes of civilians who are unconnected to those who are the alleged aggressors, then my opinion is those would not be countenanced internationally as acts of defense.
So do you think that there should be charges of war crimes to be brought against Israel?
The definition of war crime, by way of example or illustration, is, for example, the deliberate or reckless use of force by one country against the civilians, by way of example, of another member state or another state. Now, in those circumstances, it might be said that the aggressor is the country which deploys excessive force against civilians. And in those narrow circumstances, in my view, those could be characterized as war crimes.
Thank you. And I would like to further ask, as I asked the question, what are the chances for Israel being prosecuted for war crimes? And taking this into the account, as Ramby had explored this in a beautiful way and concluded if they fall into certain situation, there could be charges brought against Israel in the war crimes. Elaborating this further, I would like to mention, if you see on social media, as one of the evidence which could be taken is from the resign of Sayyida Warsi. If you could listen to her interview, or if you could listen to her article, she has clearly stated that I cannot support the government which is not taking action or proper action against Israel, which is justifiable to everyone. By the way, I would like to mention that anything put to the UN is vetoed by the USA. As the Prime Minister of Israel has mentioned, has asked the US for help against war crime charges. This shows that they fear that the charges for war crimes against them could be justifiable.
My view is that whenever any group commits a war crime or deploys excessive hostility to another based on race, religion, gender, then the international community must speak out. When the Nazis had exterminated Jews in the Great Wars, the world did not first condemn it. And in my view, that was certainly very sad. Equally, when we see today the use of excessive force deployed by one country in the name of self-defense against civilians, then we in the United Kingdom, in the European Union, have to take a steadfast position to speak out against any atrocities, whether against Israel or whether against Palestine. We cannot simply sit on the fence and do little or nothing.
But what do you think about the people who are taking procession out in London, in States, and into the streets of France?
Any group is entitled to peacefully assemble and express its views, its protest against a government, against a foreign government, providing there's no breach of the peace and providing that the protests are carried out peacefully and in an orderly manner. So to ban any group from expressing a view against a foreign country because of political ideology would, in my view, be unacceptable.
it is unacceptable. But the question now is, the Muslims or the people, not just the Muslims, as Jewish rabbi in states are leading processions. People are onto the street, but now it is vague situation that no state is taking action against Israel. For example, Iraq just broke 2 resolutions. That country was bombed. Saddam Hussein was hanged to death. Israel has broken more than 67 resolutions, and no military action has been taken against that.
One has to hesitate before advocating the use of military force. A political solution, a political position adopted by the international community is perhaps preferable to the exercise of military options. I don't take the view that a military option is apposite, but clearly international sanctions, discussions at the highest level, the involvement of the United Nations in every way, using considerable political effort, backed by the United States, would or perhaps achieve favorable results. As to whether Israel could be prosecuted for war crimes, that would depend on the international courts that are charged with the responsibility for investigating such matters.
But if you take the situation, like Israel has called the UNHRC a kangaroo court a couple of days ago after it called for an investigation into human rights violation.
Well, I suspect that that reaction was off the cuff, an ill-considered and expressed view, but I'm sure right-thinking people in Israel, because it does have extremely strong judiciary there, would view the international courts as a court of considerable gravitas and repute, and I consider that anyone charged or potentially charged with a criminal war crime or criminal offense might well express a view that the investigative court doesn't have standing or is a court with little repute. That's quite expected, but I wouldn't treat such a remark as a serious remark.
You won't treat this remark as a serious remark, but on the other hand, whenever the case is brought before United Nations, it is being vetoed by America. And Israel is being given a good political support by France and United States. France in terms that France has put ban on the pro-Palestinian processions to be called out into the streets. As you have agreed, that under international human rights, people are having their rights to call out peaceful procession.
Yes, I think there should be a political will and there should be cooperation amongst the international community to take a steadfast view to either condemn Israel or Palestine for its aggressive tactics and to consider whether charges should be brought by an independent body, which is the prosecution service of the international courts. That would be a matter for the prosecution service, which should have untrammeled powers to conduct its investigation, decide on the evidence whether it wishes to prosecute a particular organization or country under international law, and there shouldn't be any constraints from external sources to stifle that investigation.
Okay, what do you think if Israel refused to cooperate?
Many countries would, like Israel, take a view that it's not going to cooperate, and I don't think that's helpful. Openness, transparency give much credit to a country's valor and integrity. The refusal to cooperate by the potential aggressor should not deflect the responsibilities of the investigative body of the United Nations. That's the International Court of Human Rights, that's the criminal section of the courts, that if they think there is sufficient material to warrant an investigation, they should conduct it with or without investigation, or rather without cooperation. The lack of cooperation might perhaps stymie the investigations, but if they are determined to do so, they can get round it. They have to investigate if the facts call for it.
Okay, but the thing is that they try to investigate the matter, and Israel called UNHRC as a country courts. This means they might be in breach. By the way, thank you very much, Ramby de Mello, for your presence here. It's a pleasure. And to express your views on the international human rights. Now we'd like to move on towards Ashraf Ali, who is a specialist immigration advisor from Ash Immigration. Ashraf, we welcome you in our program.
Thank you.
Ashraf, I have a question. Do you view this hostility between these two countries simply based on religious differences?
No, I don't think it's just simply a religious issue. There are many Muslims living inside of Israel also. But the problem is that the Muslims that are living inside Israel aren't in a position to be able to sort of take action. They're not in the government as such, and it is the state primarily that is taking the action. That is the problem.
Okay, you mean that you are separating Jews from Zionism?
Yes.
Good. And this was the people are saying that these are not the Jews who are doing this, these are Zionists, because there are certain rabbis who have stood against the action of these Zionists. Good.
Yes, they have been, and even when we had the march in London, where many thousands of people turned out, there were members from the Jewish community that demonstrated in there, and there were also other members from the Jewish community that said that they would have liked to take part, but they were frightened that if they did take part, they might have been targeted because of the group, which didn't take place.
But don't you think that I think that this might be a political thing, like when Muslims do anything, or anyone in the name of Islam does anything, he has been given a name of extremism. And all of the Islam, or all of the Muslims are being targeted, but not in this specified area.
Absolutely. I think you do have Islamophobia, and I think the definition of a terrorist in some of the dictionaries has specifically been changed to say Muslim terrorist, and this is how things are developing. It is how the media portrays something, and it is disappointing that the media hasn't sort of displayed everything in their defenses, that they're saying, well, we have to be impartial. But some of the presenters have gone out externally, like Jon Snow, who's created a YouTube video because Channel 4 were not allowed as such to put that on.
Okay, Ashraf, how do you see this situation ever being resolved?
I think you have to lift the blockade. As Gaza, Palestine, you effectively have an open air prison. That's the definition that you'll see in the majority of debates. You have a situation where you're closed from all sides. You're restricted to what you can have in. You're restricted as to what you can do, where you can go, where your money effectively comes from, what you can do. You need to have a separate state. You need to have the government that is able to manage that state. You must allow the elected government to proceed.
So why it is not happening? Because there have been ceasefires several times, but again, Israel break these ceasefires. Because this is the main concern at this moment, that despite the fact the Palestinians are agreeing to peace, but Israel again and again breaking the resolutions and not sticking to their promises.
Well, I mean, clearly you have the occupation of the land. You have the settlements which are continuing to expand, and clearly you normally just see the one view that, well, Hamas is doing this or the Palestinians aren't doing this. You don't have this, but you don't see the other side generally, where you see the settlements are continuing, restrictions are imposed, and the life effectively in Gaza is extremely appalling. You cannot go out freely. Supplies into the country, including food, etc., is also restricted. You cannot, medicines are restricted. You cannot have that situation.
Whom are you going to blame for this then?
I would say that the international community really needs to do something, and it is an appalling situation, and it is very disappointing that the international community has not come out and condemned the situation.
International community does come out, and they have come out. If you could see the long processions in US, France, London.
I think it needs to go a step further, and the governments of different countries need to come out and condemn the actions. There are people that have come out and sort of done this, but the governments specifically have not come out and condemned it enough.
Well, this is a big question, and you have hit the nail on the head, that these might be due to political reasons, that despite this big massacre of people, innocent children in Palestine, as a Norwegian doctor who is working voluntary in Gaza's hospitals stated that he needs to keep torch with him when he's in operation theater, that there is no electricity in the hospitals either. I would like to conclude by mentioning that Muslims need to unite. Unity is a strength. Before I conclude, I would get back to Ashraf and I would ask him, but do you agree with this concept?
There are many problems, but if at the same time, if you look at the situation that I think that America has just agreed, I think it was $232 million to give to Israel in order that they can replenish their Iron Dome system. I personally didn't hear that the American government say we will also send something to Gaza to help with the rebuilding, and that is a concern for me.
This is a big concern for the humans. This is a big concern for the people. That when there was a clash in Ukraine, Russia, then America was the one or the first state to step into the field and was threatening Russia with airstrikes. But now this is a big question for the politicians or those who are in power. Whether you come forward and support these innocent Palestinians, prevent killing of innocent children, and to sticking by the law to promote peace, or just you will keep silent unless there is a threat to the world for world war. And this is the big question to everyone and the big matter for concern. And I would like to finish by thanking Ashraf Ali and Mr. Ramby Mello to take their time out and join in the studio. Thank you very much.